All right, so I left off then on page 19. JavaScript and client-side scripting. If you're not aware of this, most of the time, not maybe 100%, but most of the time, when you've got a file that ends with .html, so if you go out to a website and the file that comes up is a file that's .html, most of the time then, it's a static website, meaning that the content changes rarely, if ever. All right? But on the other hand, if you go out there and rather than that, you've got a, it ends in .aspx or .php or .jsp, then it's a dynamic website. All right? So the author finally here on page 19, about 3 paragraphs down, finally defines JavaScript as a client scripting language that allows web page authors to develop interactive web pages and sites. All right? Now they go through and they talk about what a scripting language is. They talk about what an interpreter is. I've already given you my take on what an interpreter is. All right, the authors, of course, their explanation isn't going to be exactly the same as mine, which is fine. All right, when JavaScript was first introduced, which I believe was around 95, so it's about 22 years old, it was called LiveScript. It's so old that the company that introduced JavaScript was Netscape. And I don't know if you remember Netscape, or if you're too young to remember Netscape, but back when browsers first started, there was Internet Explorer and there was Netscape. There wasn't anything else. There was no Chrome, there was no Firefox, there was no Opera. All right, and Netscape was the one that introduced JavaScript. It was called LiveScript, but somebody in Netscape got the great idea, because that's right when the Java programming language came out, that more people would use it if it was called JavaScript. All right. Now, technically, it's referred to as Ecmo Script, and they give you a little bit of stuff in there on Ecmo if you're interested in that. So here's, I'm not going to read a bit of this, but if you look at the bulletized list at the bottom of page 20, they show you there's some of the things that you can do with JavaScript. But the idea, again, is the idea of interactivity. For security reasons, there are certain things in JavaScript that you can't do. You can't write JavaScript that will go and read somebody else's hard drive. Does that make sense? You can't write JavaScript that'll go and write to somebody else's hard drive. That said, those are both kind of lies. Because if you do have cookies, all right, cookies are basically things that a server writes, okay, that a server writes to your machine. And by the use of cookies, technically, you're allowing the system to do certain things that it couldn't do otherwise. So they mentioned server-side scripting is used all over the place. This is the biggest thing. We had a whole chapter on that, if you remember, in the HTML book on e-commerce. Shopping carts are the hallmark of e-commerce. So the author mentions on the top of page 22, without JavaScript, you're not going to be able to do everything that you want to do. Let's just put it that way. So should you use client-side scripting or server-side scripting? What I'm about to say next, some people find this confusing. Because the question is, should you use client-side scripting or should you use server-side scripting? The smart-ass answer is yes. Because what you typically do is you validate on the client. So in other words, you validate using JavaScript. But it is possible for the user to turn JavaScript off. And it's also possible for a user to trick JavaScript into thinking that something is valid when it is not valid. Gee, how do we do that? I'm not going to teach you. All right? But the idea is, as we go on, as it says, you allow the client to handle the user interface processing like data validation, but then you perform the same validation all over again on the server. Because if garbage gets into your server, and for example, if your database gets corrupted, no one cares. Your bosses aren't going to say, well, it's okay, Matthew, because I realize it wasn't your fault. It was the software's fault. They're going to be, you screwed up, you're gone. All right, that's why you do it on both. All right, so how do you do that? Well, we talk about using that script element. We've already looked at this. We're going to look at it again. It has to be between script tags. If you're going to write it inline, you write it like that. So you've got the beginning script tag, your statements, and the ending script tag. If you're going to write it where it's in a different file, which is the way we will be moving toward, that beginning script tag is going to have source equals. Remember, we used a link tag to bring in our CSS for external CSS. Here it'll be the script tag with the source equals. Now there's a lot of different things. So, I mean, here's the first thing they tell you to do in your they say bring this up and go and add this script tag. They will tell you in each step here what to add. And the first thing you do is a document.write. Document.write has been around as long as JavaScript has been around. This is one way, not the best way, but using document.write is a way that you can use JavaScript to write directly to a web page. All right? And you'll notice we talked about this before. This is not mandatory. All right? And hopefully he won't mind me kind of using him here as an example, but the other day, Colin had asked me a question where he had a line of code that looked like this. Okay, what was that? Was that here or was it not there?
It wasn't there.
Wasn't there. Okay. So he had a return statement, and then after the return, he had a whole bunch of stuff in here. So I'm just going to put a comment here that says, bunch of stuff here. So there was a bunch of stuff right there, okay? Then at the end there was a semicolon, and it wasn't working, okay? And it wasn't working because the way JavaScript works, if you don't put a semicolon at the end of the line and there's nothing else there, it puts it there for you. So it did this, and then it didn't understand because he had stuff after it. So what was the fix? All he had to do was that. Once he put that up there, that sent a signal to JavaScript that there was more coming. So long story short, always put semicolons at the end of every one of your executable lines of code. Then you never have to worry about it. So they give an example here of putting JavaScript in. And you notice, if you want to put that, that's going to put two different lines it's going to write. The first line is going to write plant. The second line is going to write choices. Does everybody see? This is really important stuff if you look on the screen. Because what are we doing with JavaScript? We're writing HTML with it. You can write HTML with JavaScript. Totally legit. All right? Again, is that big a thing? It can be. All right? It can be a big thing. But notice here, in this case, that semicolon is mandatory because they put both documents.write on the same line. All right, well, what if you just did this? Then notice they're not mandatory, but still it's considered proper programming practice to put them at the end anyway. All right, and every other language that you're going to learn in this program, C#, ASP.NET with C#, JavaScript, Kotlin, actually Kotlin's different. Those three all require semicolons at the end. Kotlin, with Kotlin, the Kotlin programming language, it's optional. All right? So you might as well learn to do it the right way to begin with, is what I'm getting to. All right? You may agree with that, you may not agree with it. Now, we're not going to go into Chapter 7. That's on object-oriented programming, but if you want to learn a little bit more about it, you can read the page right here. Okay. The author occasionally will put these things in here that they call programming concepts. And again, the idea is they take something they've just talked about and try to summarize it for you. If you're interested in that, and if you're not, you're not. All right. We did a document.write. We just looked at that. Write is what's called a method. It's a built-in JavaScript method. Okay? And as it says, you can create new text on a web page using the write method of the document object. So document is the name of your object, write is the name of the method. What goes in the parentheses are what you want to write onto the web page. All right, they go through in here a few different things, but I've given you examples like this before. But if I type in this, and again, just to show you this as an example, if I say var age equals 21, oops, that 21 is known as a numeric literal. It's literally a value, okay? If I say var job equals IT instructor, all right, that's a string literal. And you already know that I can put it in either single quotes or double quotes, but whereas string literals must be in double quotes or single quotes, numeric literals cannot be. All right, so if I did this, and then I could come in here and write document.write, my name is, I didn't do name. So if I wrote all this and I said my name is, now remember, because somebody had asked about this, the \n is a new line which says put that onto another line. All right, and I come in here. Yeah, I wish my age was 21. It should make sense to you that that should say, my name is Jeff on one line, on the next line, my age is 21, and on the next line, my job is IT instructor. All right? And you have to be able to understand this. Okay? You'll notice that those variables are not inside of the double quotes. If I put that in here, so if I did this, like that, it would say my name is name, which I wouldn't want. That would be stupid. All right? JavaScript is what's referred to as a case-sensitive programming language. So with the example that I just gave you right there, when I've got var name equals, etc., let's get it back so it was correct. All right. If I did this, like that, it's going to say, my name is Jeff, my age is undefined, my job is IT instructor. Does that make sense to everyone? It's going to say that because the A in age is uppercase, and when I created it, it was lowercase. So it creates a brand new variable right here called age with a big A. And since we haven't given it a value yet, its value is automatically undefined. All right? Okay. So again, much of the stuff that you're going to end up doing in here in these first few chapters is going to be repetitive. You're going to be just mimicking what's in the book. They say do this, you do that. They say do this, you do that. All right? I've already mentioned this. I'm saying it again because it's that important. If you turn up to page 30, near the bottom of the page, again, JavaScript is a case-sensitive language. And they give an example here. It says, this will give you an error because it expects document with lowercase d. This will give you an error. So it expects things to be done a certain way. When you violate that, the only recourse the language has is to say, I don't get what you're trying to do, so I won't let you do it. Yes?
Why did it do that? Why didn't they just make the language not be case-sensitive?
There are languages that are case insensitive. And as we've been going farther and farther, when languages have been becoming more and more open and easier to use, then it doesn't matter. But since this is the way it was set up, I don't think they were going to ever change it. Comments, you've already seen both those. Okay? Right here, if I'm working with JavaScript, remember this one? Notice how both of these, // that's a single line comment. Everything to the right of it is commented out. Everything. Doesn't matter what it is. If I put it in the middle of a word, right here, and I do //, now the rest of that technically is a comment. It's going to probably screw up the rest of the program, but you get the idea. If I want a multi-line comment, so if I wanted to comment out both of these lines, I could have also come in here and done, remember, it's /, /, and then when I'm done, */. So that's a multi-line comment. They show you both of these on page 31 and 32. All right. Again, much of the rest of the chapter that we're going to be going through now, you've already been exposed to, such as page 33. The author says, writing basic JavaScript code using variables. You know what a variable is already, because when we went through those examples last week, we worked with variables. All right, you had var, OT hours equal, var, first name equal, var, etc. All right. If you do not start a variable name with var, it'll still work. But it's considered poor programming practice not to do so. So I will expect you to do so. Now, probably the two most important pages in this chapter, the bottom of page 33 and the top of page 34. On the bottom of page 33, they give you an identifier as anything you create. So these are the rules you have to follow when you create identifiers. They're shown, these 4 bullets that are on the bottom of page 33 in your book. Identifiers must begin with either a letter or a $sign or an underscore. This is me talking. I will recommend that you never use $signs in your JavaScript variables. Why? Because the PHP programming language, you must use $signs in your variables. And it can get confusing if you are writing PHP code and you're mixing JavaScript in your PHP. Okay, my opinion. If you don't like it, then go with your own guide. I would also recommend you don't have underscores. Period. You must start, the first character must be either a $sign, an underscore, or a letter. I'm going to recommend it for you 100% of the time that you use letters. In fact, I'd go even further. When you can, I would say don't even put numbers in your variable names. Just use letters. You're best off. Start it with a lowercase letter, and then when you've got a new word, so if you've got tax rate, lowercase tax, uppercase r, lowercase ate type of an idea. You also cannot have spaces, and you can't use reserved words. What's a reserved word? That's the top of page 34 in the book. JavaScript has around 60 or so reserved words that are shown in the chart here on the top of page 34. Looks like 61 if I counted correctly. So those particular variables have their own meaning. Now, some of those variables that are in there, just so you know, for example, if you look here, see this word? Okay, that's only a reserved word because they don't want you to use it. JavaScript, to my knowledge, doesn't use goto for anything. It used to be back in the days where the language that everybody used for everything was Visual Basic. Actually, when it was GW Basic, you could paint yourself into a corner and you could get yourself out by using a goto. I always gave students the old adage of, I don't know if you remember this, but I remember as being a little kid watching Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote cartoons. And all of a sudden, the Roadrunner would have Wile E. Coyote, he would be trapped. So all of a sudden, a magic bucket of paint would appear. And he'd draw himself a door, and he'd open the door and he'd go through it. All right? That's what gotos allow you to do. Right? Do things you really technically aren't supposed to be able to do. All right. Declaring and initializing variables, guess what? We've looked at this. Just putting in this, what you see on the screen right now in blue, right there, that's a variable declaration. When you add this to it, this is an initialization. Putting them together, you are both declaring a variable and initializing the variable. That should make sense to you. We went over several examples of this last week. The single equal sign like this means assignment. Remember, double equal sign checks for equality. And guess what? You're going to learn this by the end of the period today. I recommend you never use the double equal sign, ever. Why, Jeff? Because, like it or don't like it, there's a triple equal sign. And I'm going to show you what that means when we get to that in the chapter. All right, JavaScript and PHP are a few of the languages that I know of that allow the triple equal sign. Although you can do stuff like is shown on the bottom of page 35 here, where you declare a bunch of variables together and then just put a comma between them, I don't let you do that. Everybody see this? Don't do this. I want 1, 2, 3 different statements that start with var and all end with semicolons. Because that's the way you should do it. That's the way you must do it in some other languages. All right, moving up to page 36. You've seen this already. This plus sign that's right in here. It's the same thing as what I just showed you here. That plus sign is known as the concatenation operator. It glues things together. In your book, what they show you here on page 36, so this will write your sales total is, and then it'll add that sales total in there. That's concatenation. Variables on page 37. What is a variable? A variable is a container. Actually, it's a named memory location. It's a location somewhere in memory whose constants can vary. That's why you get the name variable. Because I can be writing a program and I've got here sales total and it's $47.58. Then I change it so that it equals that $47.58 plus $10 for shipping. So now I've changed the value of sales total. All right, that's a variable whose value varied. And that's what they show you here on page 37 in the book. You're going to do a bunch of this in the book on page 39 and the top of page 40. All right. You can transform variables and data using expressions. What's an expression? Well, an expression is when you add things or subtract things. This shouldn't be a big surprise to you. If you look up on the screen here, I'm just going to hit enter a few times so I can move that up. If I want to add two values, so if I say var x equal 10, var y equals 20, var sum equals x plus y. So we want to add two things, we use the plus sign. If I want to subtract two things, it's the minus sign. If I want to multiply two things, it's the asterisk. If I want to divide one thing by another, it's the /. Does that make sense to everybody? I'm asking. You have to be, those are the operators you have to use. Now, instead of making this like this, in fact, I'll leave it like that. The one operator you may not have seen before is this one. Most programming languages have that. It's the remainder operator. So how many times does 20 go into 10? It doesn't, correct? So it goes in 0 with a remainder of 10. Would you agree with that? So really, that answer to that one would be 10. So this, 30, -10, 200, 1/2, and 10. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Those are things you're just going to have to get used to using, for lack of better words. But those, when they start talking about operators, that's what they're talking about. Events, already mentioned to you. What's an event? It's a circumstance. It's something that happens in a program that's monitored by JavaScript, and JavaScript can respond to it if you tell it to. So on page 40, most of the page contains this chart that you see right here, or this table, table 1, 2. These are some of the events, all right, that you can respond to. A blur event. What's a blur event? Well, if I've got a form and I've got my first name in there and I type in Jeff, I hit the tab key and I go to my last name. Everybody understand that? Two events just took place. A blur event took place when I left my first name, all right, and a focus event took place when I went into my second field. Those are examples. Change, if you change the value of a text box. So if I've got a text box and it says enter your first name and I type in Jeffrey, 7 change events just took place. One for every character that I typed. Click, we've already looked at with buttons. Error if something, an error takes place. Key down, when you press a key. Key up, when you let go of the key. Load, when you load something into memory. The mouse stuff we've already looked at a little bit. Reset, when you click the reset button. And some of the rest of them, some of these that start with touch, those are for touch screens. Those are some of the ones that we're going to be working with. All right? Now, so how do you do that? I've already shown you some of this. We already looked at this. This is why I showed you that one to begin with. This is the middle or near the bottom of page 41. This is obtrusive JavaScript. It is obtrusive because it is written right within inside of your .html file. It will still work. It's considered poor programming practice. All right? So when I tell you, when you do a hands-on test and I say, I want you to follow good programming practices, that means don't do poor programming practices. All right? And although people might think so, I'm not the kind of guy who sits there and says, oh, okay, let's see. Oh, Jesse left off 3 semicolons. Oh, I'm dinging him big time. No. I will tell you, I've got a guy that I used to work with, a counterpart at one of the schools in the Wisconsin Technical College system, Doug Waterman. He's moved on because he's taken a job. I don't think he teaches much anymore. He's an administrator now. But Doug would give programs, and literally every program would have between 50 and 100 things you had to do. You could turn in that program, it could work perfectly, and you could get a -50 on it. Because if he was, like it was JavaScript, if he was looking for a semicolon, every time you looked for one and you left it off, you lost a point. He showed me a student's example, and it worked perfectly. And I said, what'd you give him? -17. And everything they didn't do, he ran off a hard copy and circled it. I said, wow, do you have a lot of repeat offenders? He said, no, most people only do it wrong once. It's like, I don't know if it's still like that, but I remember hearing as a little kid, again, it may have changed. I know, as time's going on, but it used to be I think it was India, when you were caught, if you were a thief and you were caught, you know what they did? They cut off your hand. And that was the old joke. We don't have many repeat offenders. All right? So the same kind of thing. I will expect you to do it right the first time. If I do notice something, I've got the right to take off for it. All right. Page 42. They've got some elements and their associated events. And if you take a look on here, the kind of interesting thing about this is everything that's on this list, you've already done that stuff in HTML. But now we're able to interact with these things programmatically, all right, programmatically using JavaScript. That's, again, what this class is going to be about. Again, there's another example. It's poorly written, but there's another example of this on the middle of page 43, right there. On-click equals. All right. What that is actually doing is two things in here. It is creating a variable right there. That right there is creating a variable that's called message. And that variable says, thanks for your order, we appreciate your business. That's what that part in blue is doing. This part is saying, now create an alert that shows that message. And just so you notice, if you look on the screen here, do you notice how you've got single quotes here and here? See that? You have to because they're inside of double quotes. So you can't use double quotes inside of double quotes. You can use single quotes inside of double quotes or double quotes inside of single quotes. All right. There's that get element by ID. You've already seen this for the first time today. Okay. Then on the bottom of the page, it shows you can have the get element by ID on the right-hand side of an equal sign or on the left-hand side of an equal sign. What's that doing? That's changing the value of whatever's in first name. So for instance, let's say that I wrote Jeff, and it was automatically set up in the program. If you write Jeff, it changes it to Jeffrey. All right, it could do that without me even having to touch it by putting in code like that. So you will come in and start adding event handlers in this chapter. The good news is the author tells you exactly what to type in. All right. All right, turning up to page 45 at the bottom of the page, structuring Java code, including a script element for each code section. If you look here, the author's got an H2 tag and then a script tag and some code. Then another H2 tag and a script tag and some code. Yes, it is legal to do that. No, you are not supposed to really do that. But as you're learning, this is the way the authors have chosen to show it to you. Be it right, wrong, good, bad, indifferent, doesn't matter. You are to follow their rules. All right? On the bottom of page 46, I'm not going to read to you. The author goes over that old debate. Should we put our JavaScript in the head or should we put it in the body? And you can read 5 books on this, and 3 will say one way and 2 will say the other way. Creating your own external JavaScript file. Do you remember when we created CSS and we put it in style tags? And then once you kind of got the hang of that, all we did was we removed those style tags, we grabbed all the CSS, put it in its own file, gave it a .css extension, and then used a link tag to bring it in. Well, now we're going to rip out all the internal JavaScript, put it in its own file that says JS, and rather than a link tag, we're going to use a script tag to include it. And that's what the author shows you here, starting on the bottom of page 47 and going on to page 48. It's that whole idea of what the author refers to as a separation of concerns. So the idea is, if I've got a problem with my JavaScript, I should be able to go into my JS file. The problem does not exist inside of my HTML file because I don't have any JavaScript in my HTML file. If I've got a problem with my CSS, I know to look in the CSS file. Why? Because it's in its own file. Same kind of an idea. All right. Turning up all the way to page 50. Oops. On page 50, the author talks about libraries. You all know what a library is. A code library is kind of similar to a library where you'd go to and take out books. With a code library, you write routines that you might be using a lot of times in a lot of different programs. You save them in your own JavaScript file or files, and you include those, and it becomes a code library. And that's what the author is talking about there. In fact, as an example, Jquery, which we'll talk about at the end of the semester, is a JavaScript library. Libraries can contain, as they mention here on the top of page 51, literally a massive amount of code. Massive means a lot. So what you can do is you can minify it. You may or may not remember this, but we looked at this before. If I go out to jquery.com and I go to download jQuery and I go, give me the compressed version, it looks like this. Yeah, it won't show it to me there. That's a minified file. It has all the same stuff that we saw before, but all the unnecessary comments and white space have been removed. All right, that's minified. On the other hand, see if it'll let me open it up in another link, another tab. There is the same file that's not minified. All right. Finally, and you know this already, on page 52, they talk about validating web pages. Again, not validating JavaScript, but validating your web page, validating your HTML code, validating your CSS. Now, I do want to mention something, and actually what's in here is so old, it probably almost never applies anymore. But this is taken from page 53 in the chapter, page 53. And if you look at this, it may look a little strange. In particular, this stuff here and this stuff here. Older browsers did not even recognize JavaScript. So when you put JavaScript in a program, they would show the JavaScript on the screen as though you typed in paragraphs, because it didn't understand what JavaScript was. So when people put this in, this is basically saying, if my browser doesn't understand JavaScript, treat it like a comment. That's what it's saying. All right? Okay. And they go through the process of validating. You already know how to do that. All right, so let's quickly look at the summary, take another break, then we're going to come back and look at the stuff at the end of the chapter. So, you should know who Tim Berners-Lee is, what the World Wide Web is. what a URL is, what a URI is, what the W3C is, what HTML is, web page authoring versus development versus programming, what client server is, what JavaScript is, what server-side script is as opposed to client-side script, what the script element is, what reserved words are, what a variable is, what an expression is, what an event is. And all that stuff is shown in these key terms. I'm not going to run over them with you, but on pages 58, 59, 60, 61, and the top of page 62. What we are going to do is, after the break, I think it's the review questions that are on pages 62, 63, and 64. We're going to go over those, okay? And that's going to be basically the review. Okay, I'm going to give you 2 days. You're going to have the rest of the period today, all day tomorrow, and all day Wednesday to work on this, okay? Then Thursday you'll have also, but Thursday when you come in here, we'll do the written test for Chapter 1. And that's the way we're going to keep doing it. Then the rest of the period will be lab, and Friday will be lab. You're going to have a hell of a lot of lab time in here. That's why I'm going to expect the stuff that you do to be of very high quality. All right, questions?
The
Yes.
next few days that we're working on this stuff, is
Yes.
it just these hands-on that are in here?
I'm going to show you exactly what I expect you to do after the break. So let's take another break. It's 9:53. Let's come back. Let's make it 10:10.